Thank you everyone for joining. We will give a few more minutes for folks to join. And this is the webinar on DevOps, Advancing Salesforce Innovation with Test Automation. Thank you everyone for joining. We're going to give folks one more minute to join and then we will begin. All right, we're going to get started. So hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, DevOps, Advancing Salesforce Innovation with Test Automation. I'm Shawnee Honadell, the Marketing Manager at AutoRabbit, and I will be your moderator for today's session. We are very lucky to have two featured speakers today, Eric Dreshfield, Salesforce MVP and Hall of Fame member, and Doug McLean, Senior Director of Sales and Alliances at Provar. Eric and Doug will be discussing why it's critical to have a test automation strategy that is tightly integrated with an automated release management tool. In today's webinar, we will be talking about the following: a brief introduction of AutoRabbit and Provar, what is DevOps, and then what is a DevOps framework, the test automation and its role, and the benefits of an integrated DevOps and test automation strategy, and Q&A. So let me get started here with a brief overview about AutoRabbit. AutoRabbit provides a professional-grade, metadata-aware DevOps solution for development on the Salesforce platform. Our Rabbit toolkit, the R-A-B-I-T that you see in the name, means rapid application, build, integrate, test. And this optimizes and simplifies DevOps processes, resulting in 10 times faster deployments, fewer defects, and better overall compliance. AutoRabbit was founded in 2015 specifically to solve the challenges of DevOps for Salesforce. Earlier this year, we received Series A funding from Full Lend Partners. We're really excited about that. And over the last 5 years, AutoRabbit has grown to 150 employees. We've won 3 Demo Jam wins in 2018, including the Demo Jam at Dreamforce. We've deployed hundreds of millions of metadata objects for customers. And we're happy to announce that we are in the top 55 for partners for Salesforce, and we are participating in the Accelerate Grow program. And below is a list of some of our ISV partners that we do work with. And here are some of our fantastic customers. Now, before I hand it over to Doug, you can ask questions by using the question button in the Zoom toolbar. Please ask your questions as they come up, as we would like to be as interactive as possible. We will also have time at the end for Q&A, as I mentioned in our agenda. And now, let's jump right in. Doug, take it away.
Shawnee. Thanks, Shawnee. Thanks for having us, and thanks everyone for the time this afternoon. So a little bit about Provar, similar lineage with AutoRabbit. We were founded in 2014 out of a platinum Salesforce SI partner called Make Positive. And so they were looking to solve a problem of having specialized tools to test the Salesforce.com platform. Headquarters is in the UK. We have offices in Nashville, Tennessee, and also in India. And again, we are very specifically focused on the Salesforce ecosystem as a Salesforce first solution. And our team, you'll find, is primarily made up of folks in QA, test automation. And so this certainly gives us some great attributes, especially when it comes to support and helping new customers get onboarded. Great set of growing customers, growing number of employees and licenses, as well as partners, and also some of the surveys and reviews you see at the bottom of the screen. To talk a little bit about what we do. So what makes us number one? So we are the number one test automation solution for Salesforce. And a couple pieces I just want to call out really are around being Salesforce first. We focus on being tightly aligned with Salesforce. So doing metadata driven testing. Couple other key areas I would call out really around the maintenance and extensibility of our products. Primarily, that's the biggest reason people come to Provar. And then finally, the thing in the bottom corner is we are 100% in alignment with Salesforce. So you can rest assured as we come out, as Salesforce launches new release like the most recent summer 20 and upcoming winter 21s, Provar is actually working behind the scenes with Salesforce to ensure that you have a solution that you can test as soon as the general availability and the betas are available. So very excited to chat with you today, and thanks, Shoni, for the time.
Great, and I'm going to now turn it over to Eric Dreshfield.
Good morning. Thanks, Shoni. Thanks, Doug, for being here as well. So the first thing that we really want to talk about is what DevOps is. We're going to give a brief overview of DevOps and talk about the 5 levels of attainment. Essentially, there seems to be a lot of confusion right now about what DevOps really is. Some people kind of think it's a process, others view it more as a technology. And really the way I kind of look at it is it's more of a movement or a cultural shift that brings about a desired outcome at an organization. And that happens through communication, collaboration, and integration between developers and other stakeholders, sometimes called operators, so you get the term DevOps. And what that really focuses in on is rapid deployment using information technology services in a systems-oriented approach. It involves planning, testing, coding, deployment, and all the things that you'll see in the life cycle that we'll talk about in just a little bit. So the 5 levels of DevOps attainment, if you want to think about it in a slightly different way, level 1, you can almost think about as kind of the where are we today. We're slightly aware, we may know what DevOps is, but we may not be doing anything about it yet. Level 2 is we're starting to use it. We're thinking about some of the things we already do and that we do pretty well, but how can we improve them through selective automation and integration? Then moving up the ladder to level 3, we're starting to use continuous integration. That's where CI/CD tools come into play to help speed the process of an integration and deployment. Level 4 is where you start to take more of a global approach, where you kind of look at the entire ecosystem that you operate in. And that's where things like Salesforce DX get rolled in and start to be seen as usability. And then level 5 is self-optimizing DevOps. It's almost the pie in the sky, not exactly reachable level of optimization, although some organizations can get there. It's just very difficult for most to get to that particular level.
So Eric, I have a question came in here and asking, can you explain the difference between CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, and DevOps?
Sure. So the way I kind of look at that is CI/CD is really part of DevOps. It's a part of the whole process. As I just sort of mentioned a minute ago, and you can still see it on the slide, it kind of comes into play in the level 3 on the attainment levels of DevOps. And what that really helps organizations do is improve their efficiency and the speed at which they can deploy new solutions. So it's part of DevOps, but it's not entirely the whole cycle.
Great. And a follow-up question to that is, how do tools like Jira and Jenkins add value to the DevOps process?
That's a great question. I mean, those are great tools on them into themselves. And one of the best things about the DevOps process, and in particular the way AutoRabbit has built it as being purpose-built for Salesforce, it allows you to take advantage of additional off Salesforce platform technologies like Jira and Jenkins, and essentially combine the best of all worlds and the best-in-class tools of everything to create one incredibly powerful tool that is your DevOps cycle.
Fantastic. All right.
So now let's ask the people in the audience to take a look at those levels of DevOps maturity that we just talked about. And we're going to launch a poll where you can just give us your view as to where you currently sit on those levels. Just make your selection on the poll that just popped up. And remember, we'll talk about this results here in just a moment to see where everybody votes. I'd share where we think things are going to go, but we don't want to sway the results. We do see pretty typical responses every time we ask this question. Should probably wait about another 20, 30 seconds to give people a chance to put their selections in. Shawnee, how we doing? We getting some good voting?
Yeah, we are. Yes. All right. I'll give it 5 more seconds. All right. We still have some coming in, so
Okay.
I'll give it a full minute. So we have a few more seconds left.
We don't want to cut anybody off and lose
No.
their selections.
Absolutely. All right. I'm going to end the polling.
All right, so what we're seeing is pretty typical of what we expect. The vast majority either between level 1 and level 2, with a handful at level 3 and an even smaller group up at level 4. And currently we see no one here at level 5. As I mentioned earlier, that is an attainable level, but it's just very difficult to get to. So these results don't really surprise me. Doug, do you see anything surprising out of these results?
No, I think certainly it's a opportunity across all maturity levels of Salesforce, and this is somewhat what I was expecting, but I think we certainly have some content for everybody on the call.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thanks for the poll there, Shawnee.
Sure.
So next, let's talk about some specific things more to DevOps, some of the challenges that you face as you're trying to implement a DevOps process, what some of the benefits you may see from automation, and then some of the various methodologies that could be used in this process. Doug, let's ask you this question. From the Provar perspective, where do you see challenges coming in, and how does that relate to the automated testing?
Sure. Well, as we all know, I myself have been in the Salesforce ecosystem going on 15 years last month. So to date myself. And one of the things that I think we see is as Salesforce has evolved over time, especially as companies grow and adoption grows, a lot of times testing tends to take a back seat. And certainly there's 2 forms of testing. There's testing and unit testing of code as it goes in, as you're pushing that into Salesforce. But there's also the UI testing, and what happens as you add more and more functionality. And it's really being added by lots and lots of people. It could be dozens and sometimes hundreds of different individuals over the years. And so one of the biggest challenge we see is really as you continue to innovate and add new functionality, how are you checking to see that you're not breaking something that's been in existence across that entire ever-growing code base? So regression testing is certainly one of those things that typically is probably not front of mind when you're doing a new deployment, but over time, the need for that to be able to ensure you're delivering quality and continuous improvement it becomes really critical. So I think it's more a matter of it's not top of mind until you really get into problems. And over time, the challenge doesn't really decrease over time as you continue to add more and more customization on top of the platform.
So that makes me think about the term that I've heard around the ecosystem for a little while now called technical debt, where over time, the more you add into your instance of Salesforce, the more tools that you're using at your organization, the more technical debt you're building. And you need to figure out ways to deal with that and how to face those challenges and make sure that as the organization continues to evolve and new people come in and other people leave, that you don't lose track of everything.
Right.
Where do you see this fitting in to DevOps and test automation?
Well, I think DevOps is really addressing that overall issue of how do, Salesforce is now really a master system of data for many companies. It's one of the key, if not the top enterprise systems that companies have been investing in and moving a lot of their infrastructure to. And so I think the problem, DevOps certainly does a great job of encapsulating all the steps along the way. But there's another challenge on top of the technical debt. It's also the velocity, right? So the way you're going to get value from not only Salesforce, but any SaaS or any applications is really being able to take advantage of the velocity of change. And so the technical debt on top of the velocity of change and updates is really where, again, both DevOps and test automation, I think, come into play. And how do you create a streamlined process as well? And have that control, have that development discipline that you need. Because ultimately, all these companies that are investing on Salesforce, they're basically becoming independent software vendors, right? You're building your own custom solutions on top of Salesforce, which guess what, are unique to you, right? So how do you manage and maintain that? And I think that makes a strong case for DevOps and also the key around test automation.
Yep, and automation in general really helps increase that velocity and allows those organizations to see benefits much faster.
Absolutely.
So awesome. So we kind of touched a little bit upon methodologies in this conversation already. Is there something else that we're missing though from this process, from the thoughts that we've already talked about around methods?
I think the piece you need to look at is, I believe everyone probably on the phone agrees that the current deployment methodologies fall into an agile model and less of a waterfall approach. And so certainly when you're working on a 1 to 2 week sprint cycle, speed and velocity are critical along with delivering those quality results. And so I think you have to look at the existing ways people test today. And fortunately or unfortunately, the default standards tend to be two key factors the way we see it. One is you do what we would call manual testing. A developer has built a piece of code, they have a requirement, they're going to test it based on what that requirement is. And then you're going to hand that to a release team. If you don't have a release team, it probably falls on the shoulders of your administrator. And the administrator is going to do some things trying to break it and potentially hand it to some users and say, here, go put hands on keyboards and kind of break this. This tends to be one of the predominant ways that people test. The other side is the tools that are out there, specifically platforms such as the Selenium framework, are great tools, very powerful and been used by developers across a lot of different entries and applications. The challenge is they're not purpose-built for how Salesforce is structured. So you end up in a scenario where it's a very specialized group of individuals that understand how to use that, and it's also very brittle. So as change happens and modifications happens, which is continuous in the sales cycle. So I mean, Salesforce updates 3 times a year. Companies on average just may do updates once a week. And so when you're dealing with that kind of velocity, those tools that are very developer centric aren't very conducive to that agile process. When we have customers that say, look, it takes me anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks just to run a regression cycle on our code base. Well, 1 to 2 weeks of just testing kind of breaks that agile model very quickly. So I think that's a key piece of why you were looking at both automating and also using purpose-built tools.
Sounds good. So purpose-built is one of those those terminologies that we use frequently here at AutoRabbit to describe our tool itself. We say that it's purpose-built for Salesforce. And the way we kind of think about that is it starts with the out-of-the-box configuration and capabilities of Salesforce, and you still have the ability to customize as necessary, and you still gain all the features and functionality like you mentioned earlier with every Salesforce release that comes out. But then you also have the ability to add those best-in-class technologies and platforms to increase and enhance the velocity of what you're doing. And all of that spins around and basically lends a big giant hand and a big push to fuel innovation and growth.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So, all right, so now it's time for another poll. Let's ask the members of the audience here today what tools they're using for their own Salesforce test automation. Shawnee, you want to launch that for us, please?
All right, there you go.
Thank you. So just like the last one, just make your selection, and we'll give everyone around a minute or so to review this. Doug, I suspect you have a hunch as to where these are going to land.
I will not. Will not sway the jury on this one. So
you can share your thoughts after we share the results of the poll.
absolutely.
I have a couple thoughts on this one as well.
Yeah, it's key. Ultimately, is defining. Do you have a strategy? And if you don't have one, you should be looking at one. And I think these are pretty common sense things, and hopefully align with people can identify with one or more of these.
Right. And just like you said a minute ago, everyone's Salesforce deployment, everyone's software utilizations are slightly different. So it's all unique to their organization's needs. And so test automation and how they do that should be the same.
Yep. It's
How we doing, Shawnee?
All right, so we're going to end the polling. We're just at a minute. And there you go.
All right.
There we go. I predicted the future, so not surprising. And I think we look at it as really a lot of times we get so focused on the business and making sure we're releasing results. A lot of time testing takes that back seat. And while yes, it's critical across all Salesforce customers of all sizes, as you add more functionality, features, your core business processes to it, that problem doesn't get smaller. So it's not hard to understand. And hence, this is why we built the product in the first place, was because there really weren't a lot of solutions out there to go focus on Salesforce. But I appreciate everyone answering the question, because we basically came out at about 90. We came out exactly at 90%. So it was
not
what I
bad.
expected to be. So
Fantastic. All right, let's move on through the agenda.
yeah, so let's talk a little bit about kind of, you were talking about that whole DevOps cycle and where test automation fits. This was a recent publication from Vala, who's the chief technical architect or evangelist there at Salesforce. And I think everyone's seen this across with both Provar and with AutoRabbit. And that is, there's kind of the four key buckets in the DevOps cycle. And certainly we fall in that build cycle. And I would break testing, as I mentioned earlier, into two pieces. One is there's certainly the unit testing, right? Where I have to run my Apex code and I have to get at least a score of 70 to be able to promote code into Salesforce. But then there's that whole thing, what about everything else? And that can be literally hundreds or thousands of different workflows and functionality that you've been adding over time. And so, I would argue that the test bucket is really probably the key linchpin in the cycle, because if you're not addressing it soon, and really there's probably two sets of customers. Ones are you either have a lot of complexity or you have also a lot of velocity of change, right? So you may not need solutions like Provar. You might not be at that point in your life cycle, but I think you certainly need to be thinking about it as part of your strategy. But the other point we'd make out is really there's several, you'll see these little icons around the circle here. And so you mentioned things like Jira. So a lot of people are using tools like Jira or the Zephyr plugin to handle their user stories. So they're defining what their testing is going to be, as well as in their development cycles, packaging and documentation. And then when you get down into what tools such as AutoRabbit are doing, around that release management. How do I handle not only the deployment, but the rollbacks? And then monitoring and maintaining compliance. These are really key issues, especially in companies in regulated industries like financial services or healthcare and pharma. You know, they have to report, hey, what changes am I putting in my system? And have I thoroughly tested them, because I can be audited on those. So again, it's a life cycle, but the point we would bring out here is really that testing on both unit testing, but also UI testing and regression, which is what we handle, is really, really key. So, I mean, my ask is be sure if you don't have a strategy, you need to be thinking about one. And that's going to be a key point, especially as you grow. I think you're on mute, Eric.
I'm muted, sorry. Test automation. There's probably 3 basic questions that a lot of people are thinking about. Why, when, and who. So why do we need to do it? When should we first think about it? And then who inside the organization should really be involved in it? Let's talk about that for a little bit, Doug.
Sure. I think the piece, a lot of times it's very easy to get caught up in the release cycle of new functionality and the development. I think that's certainly where testing and QA typically has lived. But I would also get people to consider, as you're looking at this challenge, it's ultimately what is the business outcomes we're expecting from our investment in Salesforce, right? So it's things, not only user disruption, but also customer disruption. And so when you launch, you can test as much as you possibly can and have all the great business thoughts of what you're going to happen. But ultimately, when you have a user disruption, and more critically, when you have a customer disruption, these can have a significant impact on your business. You know, when someone can't call up and place a service request for a critical piece of equipment, that is a bad thing to have happen. So you have to look at it across the spectrum, both from the development and also from the business impact side, is why you need to look at it. And especially as you're adding more and more users, more and more functionality to the platform, these things, again, don't get smaller over time. So that's where I think that you have to be looking at something, whether you have a product or a plan, just be thinking about that as you grow your applications.
So then the best time to think about this, the when in this question, is really as early as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's people, there's a couple of schools. Certainly as people are new to Salesforce and doing new implementations, it's probably they're less aware of that. They may be working with a system integrator, they're doing the deployments themselves, and it's relatively straightforward to test, okay, is Salesforce doing what I expect it to do out of the box? But the challenge becomes really as you go into phase 2, phase 3, which will be continuous. That's when what we would term as the regression gap starts rearing its ugly head. And so that's where building out a catalog, building out a suite of solutions or testing scenarios, and then also being able to maintain and manage those. That's really a key area that we see people getting that advantage. It's not just building and running a test. It's how do I maintain and manage it over time, because that's typically where a lot of costs come in. So think about it early. You may not need it when you're, if you aren't making a lot of changes and you don't have a lot of complexity and your use cases are relatively compartmentalized. But once you start getting across a much larger enterprise scenario, I think that's when, if you're not already there, you may already be experiencing that pain. So the sooner you start thinking about it, the sooner you can start addressing it.
So one other thing that it sounds like what you're also saying that you haven't come right out and said yet is the answer to the who is really more than your developers. It's your administrators, your end users, and possibly even your customers that should get involved in testing. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think certainly as a technology and a product, we certainly have our foundations with people that do QA, that do test automation, that do testing as a core function. And obviously you want to provide a solution that makes those folks' jobs easier, more scalable, so that they can test more, test faster, and test deeper. But as we all know in the Salesforce ecosystem, I mean, Salesforce has made its, Salesforce hasn't grown to where it is today in 20 years by being a deep developer. So you absolutely can do development and you have to develop things, but certainly it's that business user, it's that declarative development model. And so both the admins, maybe the folks that are really doing more pure Salesforce development that may not have done a lot of other type of test automation, those are key personas that we're seeing, as well as the line of business owners, right? Who are the stakeholders that own Salesforce, because they're the ones getting held accountable of saying, hey, we have to go drive more value out of Salesforce. We have to drive user adoption, and we have to improve our bottom line in delivering to our customers. So I think the customers definitely become the beneficiary of this, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. But certainly the administrators across all levels, technical business analysts, as well as people managing applications that touch and interact with Salesforce. That's another key area that we see as well. How do I handle my flow of data that's coming into Salesforce that may be going into an ERP and coming back? So it's beyond just necessarily the Salesforce umbrella, but also across the IT organization.
Fantastic. Yeah, it definitely encompasses a large swath of applications and processes. So the benefits of really developing a strategy to look at DevOps and test automation, it like you said just a minute ago, it really all kind of circles around and hits the bottom line of an organization. And that could be financially, but and certainly hopefully is for a lot of organizations. But the benefit, I think one of the key benefits is the ability to drive the speed of your innovation faster, and help your organizations grow and move forward quicker. Let's kind of take a step back from that for a second and talk about what types of skills are required to get there, and maybe how someone who's new to this can get started.
Certainly. One area that we look at, and I, having been in the ecosystem for a number of years, working with several, both ISVs and system integrator partners, the Salesforce ecosystem is expanding at a rate bigger than there is people to be able to fill those positions. In fact, I talk to a lot of people that, are very excited, and they say, hey, I learned this new tool called Salesforce. It's really awesome, which it really, really is. But if you look at the people coming into the ecosystem, and certainly you look at the growth of events like, Dreamforce or Trailhead DX coming, the number of new people coming in. So I would probably categorize it a couple ways. One is, we try to focus really on what I would say is that technical business analyst, right? People that understand what's the business outcome I need and what is the system and the data of where it needs to be. So you have to be able to articulate that and identify what those stories are. So at a baseline level, I think that that's key. But then certainly as you grow and expand, people that have both either a developer mindset or understand how code works, they need easier ways to test across broader tools as well. And so I would say the answer is somewhat broad. You don't have to be, if you are a developer and you are a QA expert, you're going to find, hey, are there tools that are going to help me be more efficient and effective? And if I'm new to this concept of automation and testing, are there resources available to me to help me upskill my knowledge set? And we believe the answer is absolutely. And that's what I think all partners that are, true participants in the Salesforce ecosystem need to be looking at, is how do you make that easier across? It's not a one size fits all market. And ultimately we're going to have to expand the number of people that have these variety of skill sets in order to meet the demand and actually the growth of where Salesforce is going. So I think certainly the required skills is, yes, you need to have a good concept of the business process you're trying to test or review. And then also you need to have an understanding of, hey, what do I need to automate and what don't I need to automate? You may not need to automate everything, but creating that baseline is really critical.
Awesome. Very good. Very great explanation there. Thanks.
So a couple of things we do, I mean, if you look at really, it's how do you add, how do we create a synergy between AutoRabbit and Provar, and certainly adding that test automation steps inside of the inside of the AutoRabbit deployments. How do I link them to my, my regression suites? Creating the reporting that you need so you can validate these. And also, it's minimizing that maintenance. That's kind of a key piece. And so certainly any solutions you're looking at, it's really about not just looking at it as a single point in time or project based, but how do I maintain and manage that to support my business? And that's certainly the synergy we try to connect with AutoRabbit, but certainly there's a lot of options out there, and we'd love to be a choice. But again, those are the types of things I would look at from why you leverage tools that play nice together, use the best of breed solutions, and do what works for your organization.
Fantastic. Well, good information. Thanks for sharing that, Doug.
All right. So now we are in the Q&A portion of our webinar. So if anyone has questions, please go to the bottom of your Zoom toolbar and there's a Q&A. If you have any questions, please put those in for Doug and Eric. All right, there's a question came in for you, Doug. How long does it take to become proficient with Provar?
That is a great question. Like a good automobile, your mileage may vary, but typically what we see is if you have a QA or test automation concepts already and you've been using other tools and that's part of your job, typically we probably see about a 1 to 2 week learning curve on that. And certainly that accelerates more as you do more testing and build out those regression suites. As far as someone who's new to test automation and, we're, as many of you were, said, you don't have a solution. Typically we're seeing anywhere from, 2 to 6 weeks to become provisioned. Literally with our tool, you can be creating tests literally in a matter of hours. And one area we try to do is also include not only some great getting started materials and some great training, but also include what we call jumpstart consult. So we got someone that will go on that journey with you to help you get provision. One of our key customers, Splunk, they were able to convert all of their testing over to Provar literally within 90 days. And they were seeing upwards of a 75% reduction in the overall effort within a quarter. So I think that 2 to 6 weeks, depending on your experience level, is absolutely attainable and documented.
Great. And a follow-up question to that is, what other applications can be tested with Provar outside of Salesforce?
That's a really good question. So one area that we focus, while I mentioned we're Salesforce first and certainly have a lot of feature functionality to test everything in the Salesforce suite, whether that's through metadata, through APIs, through working with Lightning Web Components or Visual Force pages as an example, trying to make that easier. You can also use Provar to test other applications. So that could be custom built web applications. So any browser-based application that you have, you can also use us to test standard web services, SOAP or REST. Also connections, and also do testing of things such as database and on-premise applications. And so that's kind of the other piece. It's not, Salesforce is no longer an island. Probably the most common use case we see is something is starting in Salesforce, let's say CRM, and then you're moving into CPQ, which is again another thing on platform, but then maybe you're pushing data over to an ERP such as NetSuite as an example, and then NetSuite's doing its thing, and then you're bringing some data back. So that would be how I would categorize that end to end. You have to be able to not only see what's coming into and out of Salesforce and what's coming back. So web applications, again, if you can access it from the internet or even if it's inside your local infrastructure, typically we can also test that.
Fantastic. Another question came in is, how do we test chaos scenarios?
That's a fantastic question. In fact, we had a pretty good quote about that. It's from one of our other presentations. Someone's made the comment that making things break is actually an art, right? So how do I go find all the things that needs to break? I probably would defer to one of my test architects because I've not been a physical tester. So I'll raise my head on that. But certainly doing some of those investigative type of thing, what if scenarios. Again, it's not just about testing to make sure stuff passes. It's about what options can I throw in to potentially see what breaks. And so I think we have some feature functionality in the product where you can do field asserts and you can do some other we have some pre-built functions in our product that'll actually let you get creative in your destructive nature to try to figure out how you can break things.
Awesome. We have another question here is, to what extent can we automate Salesforce using Provar?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
To what extent can we automate Salesforce app using Provar? Does that make sense?
I believe so. I mean, ultimately, we try to focus on everything that Salesforce does in the platform. I think we would certainly want to work with you and understand where are the key areas you want to automate. You may not need to automate all functions, but fundamentally that end-to-end across the Salesforce, the entire platform is really where we fit. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but certainly happy to have that as a follow-on conversation. One thing I would call out too, much like AutoRabbit, is that we're very confident in our product and what it does, and we know there's a lot of tools out there. We absolutely want to be a consultant to you to help understand where the tool used, but we don't want to sell you a bunch of consulting hours, to be clear. So helping identify some of that strategy is certainly something we do really in our pre-sales cycle, and certainly we do things such as complementary proof of concept. So I would encourage people, if they're interested, that's something we can help you with.
Awesome. So Doug, we have a few more questions are coming in. Does Provar offer on-site boot camps with an internal team?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, on-site training, I don't know when we'll see that again, but yes, we certainly can do on-site boot camps and training. We are expanding and growing our capabilities to do on-demand. We certainly do a lot of training now, has moved to Zoom, much like our virtual events and in-person events. So yes, we do offer training. Typically our training, as I mentioned from consulting, is not overly intensive. Usually it's anywhere from 3 to 5 days, and those are usually like 6-hour sessions. So that's typically the timeline that people can get up and going. And when you mention a boot camp, we'll not only teach you on the product, but we'll spend some time building out some of your own use cases and test cases. Fantastic.
Another question. What will be the maintenance effort of the scripts whenever the Salesforce releases happen?
That is an excellent question. So one of the things, as I mentioned, we are engaged in what Salesforce calls their monorail program. So we are actually working with Salesforce well in advance of the beta releases for solutions like Summer 20 as an example. And so one of the areas we really focus on is having our releases aligned so that when those do become generally available, you can use those to test your upcoming releases. So absolutely, you will see that. And the other piece we do is being tightly focused in the Salesforce ecosystem. We also try to run webinars, which we recently did a couple weeks ago, which somewhat distills down the 500-page release notes from Salesforce and really talks about what are the key new feature functionalities coming out in the release and what the impacts are on either existing testing or how you want to test new functionality. Because as we all know, things like Lightning Web Component, Lightning continues to evolve over time. And so we try our best to certainly keep up with all those, but certainly we want to provide some guidance and direction as those changes occur.
Fantastic. Another one came in. We usually use JMeter SOAP UI for API testing. Can we use Provar for this purpose?
I believe, and if I'm not mistaken, those are more for testing volumes of APIs and performance testing, if I'm not mistaken. I believe PVT, right, performance and volume testing. That's typically probably not what we do. We can work with tools in conjunction, but if you're talking in context really for testing throughput into the Salesforce platform and monitoring that, that's not necessarily a core capability that we have. But again, we try to play nice with the other tools that are out there.
Wonderful. Now, is there any video tutorials regarding Provar that can help folks learn about test automation?
Absolutely. We have a variety of webinars. We have one called Provar 101, which I think is a really good overview of why test automation matters, and then also a good introductory demo, which gives you an oversight of how the use of the tool. And it's certainly a no-code, low-code solution where literally you are in your Salesforce interface and I'm right-clicking on a field and adding it to a test case and running. So a lot of power there. We do have a variety of demos available on YouTube, but plan on seeing more of those that we're incorporating into our learning management strategy. Happy to provide that for you. Just reach out and we're happy to point you in the right direction.
Fantastic. All
And
right.
going back on the earlier comment, I think we can test all REST and SOAP-based SDI APIs, so we can test the APIs absolutely through the tool. Again, that kind of part of that whole end-to-end strategy as well.
Perfect. Just checking if there's any more questions. Folks, if you have any questions, please put in the Q&A or in the chat. All right. Does it include performance and load testing?
I think that may have been how I answered the question earlier. Yeah, we're not really that tool. I think we can interoperate with those, but that's not what Provar does. We're more regression testing and UI and functional testing, as opposed to volume testing. You can certainly access the various APIs of Salesforce for bulk data loading. As an example, a lot of people will use that for loading test bed scenarios. You have a database or an Excel spreadsheet that has 1,000 records and stuff like that. But as far as testing the actual performance and volume testing, that's not really one of the things that we focus on.
All right. I'm going to check for any more questions. In the meantime, everyone, I've added in email addresses for both AutoRabbit and Provar. Should you would like to schedule a demo or have more information, it's info@autorabbit.com for AutoRabbit and info@Provar testing for Provar. And I do not see any other questions. So with that, I want to thank both Eric and Doug for today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, and thanks everyone for joining. Again, appreciate you taking the time, and certainly if we can help you on your testing automation journey, happy to be a source of information. But best of luck to everybody, and hope everyone is doing well in this age of disruption that we're currently in. So thanks so much for having us, Shani.
Oh, fantastic. And Eric, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Alrighty. Thank you, everyone. And we will have this recording available in the next 24 to 48 hours.